I don't know if you can tell or not in this camera, but this one I've upgraded to LED, and they're 1750 lumen replacement, bulbs, and they're compatible with different ballast configurations. The rapid start, there's rapid start, instant start, magnetic ballast, and bypass. So it's kind of hard to tell in here just how much brighter the LED lights are compared to the old fluorescent. But what I'm going to do is just show you how to go with the bypass configuration, because it's kind of the safest thing. You don't have to worry about the ballast going bad. The main thing, and it's not as bad in my garage as it is my shop, but when it's cold, you're waiting 5 minutes for the fluorescent bulbs to warm up and start giving off any decent amount of light. Plus, these are pretty inefficient compared to LED. So we'll begin disassembling this light, and I'll be back. So first, we start by just twisting these bulbs. I imagine most people are pretty familiar with this by now, but you have to just twist the bulb until these two prongs here are aligned straight with the little slot, and we can pull the bulbs out. Maybe, if they want to come out. See, as you can see, they are straight, but there we go. So what we're left with is a dead fly. And in here, this is a runner for the wiring from, but take this apart and see what we're up against. So far I've got one side off. It's, this is one of these Lights of America, like Kmart, Walmart brand lights. And, I mean, you can see it's pretty dirty. It's lasted a long time. But it's really cheaply built, and like all the other lights I've done in my shop and my garage have been all steel, and just, a couple screws, everything pops apart. This thing is like clipped together, and there's a couple little tabs on this side, right there and down there, that hold the end cap on, which then of course holds the sockets in, and I don't know, it's just chintzy, but anyway, halfway there. So I was able to pop this other end off without breaking everything. There's a couple wires here, power wires that run back through this to the ballast. I had to get the ends off in order to be able to basically move this out and pry this track up. But as you can see, these three wires run from over here, and it's actually, one contact here, one contact here are probably looped together, and then two individual wires run back to this ballast. And then there's some more lines here with the power coming in and being connected into the ballast. So I'll get this apart. The ballast is actually part of this end of the sockets here. Luckily, there's power or individual wires for the power to the sockets here, and this here is the main cord, this white cord. So what I should be able to do is cut the lines where they go into the board for the ballast, and pull a little bit more cord into this light, connect it up to this end of the sockets here, and I'll be able to snip and cap all these wires. By the way, like I said, I was going to pull in a little bit more of the power wire, and what you can do is, this is a it's like a little crimp, so that if you pulled on this power wire, it's not going to pull out of here and like break the connections. But what you can do is take pliers and squeeze this together and push it out through here, and pull it out this side, And then what I can do is put a little bit more wire in. I'll show you after I've done that. To give you a little bit better idea of what I'm talking about, this connector here is what held this wire in this hole here. So basically, where the wire was pinched is where it was. I'm going to give myself like a few more inches, just move it down on the wire, and basically squish it back in like this. It's going to get squeezed together and shoved back in the hole. So after squeezing it back together, this is what you have. This comes out, and it's about 3 extra inches, and that's about all I need. So what I'm going to do is snip these wires fairly close to that board. I may even try to yank the board out of there, the ballast, because I don't need it, but I don't know how they have fastened it in. But basically, I'm going to cut these 4 wires, cut the power wires from the ballast, and these bulbs are going to be direct wire to 110 volts, and the wires coming out of the ballast over here, I'm going to end up cutting probably pretty close to this end and cap all of them. But I'm going to have to take this apart too to make sure that that these connectors are not shunted together. I have a feeling, judging by the rest of the lights I have, that this connector and that connector are connected by a wire inside of here. So we'll see in a little bit. So it was actually really easy to pull that ballast board out of this plastic thing. There was a little twist tie just holding these, and once I took that off, I was able to kind of just pull this board out. But you know, typically you can leave the ballast in, it's no big deal. I don't really want to, because this opening here will give me a little bit of room for, once I connect all these wires up, for the wire nuts and stuff to get stored in. This light casing, whatever you want to call it, doesn't really give you a whole lot of room for modifying things. So since I don't plan on needing the ballast again, I'm just going to cut all the wires and take it out. So here's the ballast out of the light, all the wires cut. The 2 whites there were the power coming in, and then 1 black and red to each lamp holder on this one end here. So like I was trying to show you, see, I can put, once I wire nut these wires up, they really leave almost no room between that plastic housing end cap and this thing where the lamp holders and the ballast were. So all of that's going to get shoved into that hole, and like I said, so these are cut here. What I'm going to do is pop this apart, which is kind of a pain. You can see there's like a clip basically on either side, but it's like the clip is too small or too big for that little hole. So I had kind of some trouble getting this end apart. I assume this one's also going to be a little bit of a pain, but I'll get it and I'll be back. So before I continue ripping the rest of the wires out, can't get this stupid end apart, but I pulled out a black wire out of there, and the interesting thing about these lamp holders is these wires seem to just be pushed in, and then they kind of stay put. As you can see, I pulled out a black wire, and there is a black wire in there that runs from that connector, it looks like, to, that connector. I'm going to see if I can pull those wires out, like I just pulled the black out of that hole on the right there. So we shall see. I'm trying to do this without breaking this end off, because then this light's sort of useless. So be right back. Okay, so I'm at the point now where I was able to pull all the wires out of this side by just prying this open and carefully wiggling them and pulling out, and that worked. So what I'm going to do is actually put this the raceway cover back in, and put put this end cap back on, and then I'll proceed to stripping these 2 wires and these 4 wires and soldering them. So, like I was saying, strip the wires here, and these are all stranded. Again, the other lights that I converted over, I mean, your power cord here is always going to be stranded for flexibility. These are normally solid pieces of wire, and I don't really mind wire nutting like 2 solid strands with 1 stranded wire, but I don't really want to wire nut these. So what I'm going to do is actually solder them. Some rosin core solder here, and a high temp soldering gun. I always like using heat shrink tubing too, and so I'm going to cut a piece of this, slip it over this guy here, and solder these wires together, slip it back, and heat shrink. So I shall be back to show some of that. So this here is, the wires are prepped. I twisted the 2 reds and this one leg of the power cord together, and then I'm going to solder it. Slide this heat shrink tubing over, like I was saying, just slide it up and shrink it down. So I just got done soldering it. I'm just going to let it cool for a second. Anytime you're using or soldering like nice clean copper, it's usually not an issue. Can't get this thing to focus. It's not usually an issue to get the solder to make like a really nice solid connection, as you can see there. So you want to make sure that the solder is all intertwined like it is, and this is cooling down. So what I can do is at this point just slide this heat shrink tubing up. I like to make sure I have like a healthy little bit to work with here. Solder is right in the middle, and some people use just like a heat gun. I tend to like to use these little torches. It's just like a lighter inside, so it doesn't get super hot, but works super fast, and you can be real quick to get it all shrunken down and safe and good to go. I'm going to do the other ones, and I'll be back. So if you remember, that ground wire right here was attached here. When I ran a continuity test between here, between down here, when this green wire was still attached down here, and this hook, there was no continuity, and that's because at the manufacturer never scraped the paint off of this, so and the other side as well. So there was no way for this ground to actually ground anything. Plus they used a chintzy little connector here with no solder, so I just put some solder on there. Now if I check the continuity between that and here, assuming this is actually touching, you can hear, you heard the chirp, but basically you'll have to take my word for it, but there is continuity now between this ground wire and this actual lamp assembly, which is the only way for this thing to be safe. In fact, maybe, whatever. I needed a better way to hold this camera, obviously. But even this little spot here should have continuity. Yeah, and it does. Anyway, it's safe now. I'm going to get this thing reassembled and these wires tucked. So here it is, all back together. You can see my little ground wire down there, but it's perfectly fine, clears the light, and all's good. These are tucked in, and as you can see, you can't see the pins, which means that they're in the correct position. So here's the big unveil. Hopefully it's a hell of a lot brighter. Yeah, and it sure looks that way. Anyway, there we go. So I'm gonna get this hung back up, and I'm glad this is done.